Hello and welcome to the Becoming Your Highest Self podcast. I'm your host, Macy Renee, and we are going on a journey together, my friend. If you've been looking for a podcast geared towards your growth, self-awareness, navigating your brain's daily mind drama, and deep inner work to become your highest and best self, you are in the perfect place. Let's get started. Good morning. Happy Monday. Welcome back to another episode of Becoming Your Highest Self podcast. I'm Macy. I'm so excited to have you here with me. You guys, we are going to hit 50,000 downloads probably by the time you listen to this episode. I am so excited about it, and I'm actually going to do a giveaway for some free one-on-one coaching because of hitting the 50,000 download mark here soon. You will see it posted on Instagram and Facebook, and when you do, there will be instructions on that giveaway. So keep an eye out for that. Also, I have been taking so much time to rest here recently and haven't been posting a ton on like Instagram or Facebook because, to be completely honest, 365 days of Facebook Live took a lot more energy out of me than I thought. And I'm actually loving looking back and seeing the Facebook Lives because, they pop up in your memories on Facebook. And it's funny because I can remember throughout my 365-day journey judging myself, thinking like, I'm not even talking about anything. I don't even know why I'm doing this challenge. To me, it felt like every day I was just getting on and saying, I'm tired, and getting off. And so now that they replay every single day on my Facebook memories, I'm able to catch each clip or each video, and they're actually really good. So I was way harder on myself than I thought. And with that being said, every day that they pop up, it's becoming more and more evident why towards the end I started running out of steam, because there's actually such great value in, even I think right now I'm on like day 30 of, seeing it back, and it's like, oh, well, no wonder you were exhausted by the end of 365 days of Facebook Live. You actually were talking about some very beneficial things throughout. But it's so funny how our mind tells us something so different than what is our reality. And that's kind of what I want to dive into today. Not exactly that, but more so about how our mindset becomes fixed and hardwired, and how you go about rewiring your brain. So we're going to dive into that. And before we do, I just want to also say, if you're not on my email list, go ahead and get on. I don't send a lot of emails. I really don't. I send emails whenever I either get in a big inspirational mood and write a ton of them, or I send them whenever I have announcements to make. But I really want to be able to get back to email communication here soon. And there's going to be some different announcements in that with the end of the year coming up and whatnot. So just make sure you're on the email list if you don't want to miss anything important, or any, types of offers that will be coming out as well. Okay. All right. So let's talk about this. I want to first dive in by saying the brain is so powerful. It is so powerful. You get to decide in your life what you want life to look like, no matter what you've experienced in your past, no matter what your circumstances have been up to this point. Okay. And I think that's something that we all have to really wrap our minds around, is that no matter what you've been through, or no matter what you're currently going through, there is always the opportunity to change the trajectory of your life at any given point. The only thing that you have to do is decide and take a new way of thinking into your future based on the life that you want to live, not on what you're currently living or experiencing. So when we start off as little kids, and I will say that the inspiration for today's episode, I was looking at Amanda Francis on Instagram. I love her. She's a coach. She does a lot of like digital creation. So you pay for a course. You don't necessarily work with her one-on-one. You watch her coaching videos, which is a great business model as well. And then if you're more of like a higher, like if you're a client that's making millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, then you can afford to work with her one-on-one because that's what she charges. She's known as the money queen in the coaching industry. And I've learned a lot from her. I've actually done a few of her programs. So anyways, I was looking at her Instagram this morning, and she has 2 little stepchildren, and she was sharing in her stories how her little girl was wanting to put her shoes on this morning, and as she was putting the shoes on, she was modeling everything that Amanda does with her in the mornings. So like, push your foot in, like wiggle it to get it on, push it down, that kind of stuff. And her comment on there was, it made me realize that kids are always absorbing the things that you're telling them and hardwiring their brains to eventually be able to imitate what they see. And it instantly hit me that that is something that I wanted to bring on the podcast today, because although we've talked about it in some different episodes, I really want you to understand how malleable your brain is, but also how much more challenging this can be if you choose to stay in a fixed mindset. So the beautiful thing about children is that their brains are just full of potentiality and creativity, and, they're really moldable, which can be a wonderful thing, but it can also be a very heavy thing, right? As a parent, knowing that kids are going to really absorb whatever you're teaching them, however you're showing up in your life. So as a child, especially the first 7 years of life, and we've talked about this, your brain is essentially a sponge. Every single thing that you hear, every single thing that you see, all the things you experience, whether it's a beautiful, wonderful, amazing childhood or it's full of trauma, divorce, hardship, if there was domestic abuse in your home, if there was a lot of drinking or drug use, or a lot of, maybe your mom had a bunch of different partners or your dad had a bunch of different partners, like whatever it was in your first 7 years of life, those years impact you more than you will ever know. And a lot of times coaching isn't about going into the past. Therapy is more past focused, but I will say with my clients, I often do ask what they've maybe experienced in their younger childhood years. And I'm asking with the intent of getting an understanding as to their bigger picture of, how they're hardwired. So for me, for instance, my first 7 years of life were spent in a lot of adult conversations that I shouldn't have been a part of. Now, did they make me who I am today? Absolutely. But would I allow my kids to experience the same things that I experienced the first 7 years of my life? Absolutely not. And not any of the years after, right? As much as I could avoid it. But those 7 years of life are when you are taking in the world and you do not have the ability to kick back the things that you're learning. You don't have the ability to question the things that you're learning at that time. So if your mom, for instance, let's just say with Amanda Francis, right? She's teaching her stepdaughter how to put on her shoes a certain way. That little girl is going to think this is the way to put on the shoe. And it becomes evidence when you start to see in their behavior them modeling exactly what you've taught them to do, right? If you teach them how to pick up their trash every single time they throw something on the floor, they learn what to throw into the trash. I saw it all the time as an OT. I was a pediatric OT for 6 years for birth to age 3 and just recently walked away from that to, move to Vegas and pursue my full-time dream of, life coaching and leadership coaching. But when I would go to daycares, I was able to see just how different sometimes a child's behavior was in the daycare setting based on what they were learning from their teacher and routines and other kids, and then how they would behave when they'd go home based on the routines of mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, whoever their caregivers were, okay? And so it's super interesting, but those first 7 years of life, your brain is like a little sponge. So I want you to just take a minute and think about your first 7 years of life. Do you have a lot of joyful memories? Do you have, a lot of good experiences in your mind when I ask you to think about that? Or do you immediately think, oh my gosh, my parents fought all the time, or my, mom was a single mom and she really struggled and she talked about hardship with money all the time, or I can remember wanting a certain doll and not being able to get it because my mom had said we didn't have the money, or my dad had said there wasn't enough, or whatever it was, okay? Are those the type of memories that come up, or do you have really happy memories? And so that kind of tells you just a little bit of a snippet of what was stored in your subconscious, because that's the second piece. Whatever happens in those first 7 years of life gets stored subconsciously. So if you were playing in the living room and overhearing, your little brain was overhearing conversations about there not being enough money, there not being enough food, being afraid of if the lights were going to get cut off, things like that, you didn't have the ability to reason and logic and ask why and what does that mean and are we going to be okay? You're little, but all of those things are being stored subconsciously in your brain as programming. Now, when it gets stored as programming, here's what happens next. After age 7, so around 8 to 12, that's when we start to question the things that we have been taught up to that point in our life. So you may approach your parent and say, well, why don't we have enough money? Well, what does that mean? How much money do we have? Well, can I get this thing? And if they're like, no, you're also taking in information that way. So you're learning like, okay, so there's limits in life. Okay, so there's not endless amounts of money. Okay, so we can't afford that. We're not those types of people. And if your parent also is not super self-aware, right? And they're like, this group of people is rich and they have all of these things, but we don't. So your brain starts to combine what it's known and experienced the first 7 years of life, in addition to what it's hearing in like 8 to 12 years, okay? And it's starting to pull together a story and pull together what makes sense to it, like the brain for that person, for that individual person. So we're pulling things from our subconscious, and then we're pulling things basically from our conscious experiences, and we're marrying them together to make sense of what's happening in the world. And even still as a kid, we apply it to ourselves. This is why every adult listening to this podcast, this is why it is so important that you do the work. I'm just going to go out there and say it. Like you can choose to do the work. You can choose not to do the work. You're here listening to the podcast. So I'm assuming that if you're listening to the podcast, you care to do the work. This is why you do the work. Okay? Because your decisions, your choices are not just impacting you. They're not. They're impacting everyone around you as well, especially if you have kids. How you show up impacts the way that your kids will think about things. And this was another thing that made me want to talk about this today. Amanda Frances is super successful as a coach, right? She does not believe in limits, restricting herself money-wise. She has very different beliefs. If you have never heard of her and you go follow her, she might trigger you just because of her belief systems. But when you get to know her, it's really mind-blowing and very powerful, her thoughts about it. And I got to thinking, like, her stepchildren will have a completely different experience of money and finances and their thoughts about it versus a parent who's maybe struggled and thinks, we could never have that, we could never do that, we will never make that, there's not enough, we cannot go on vacations like that, we cannot afford things like that, you can't get that. That is a fixed mindset, because at any given point, if you're not happy with your situation, you can change it. The challenge is that the older that we get, here's what happens. Okay, I really wanted to bring this full circle for you. So we talked about the first 7 years of life. Everything that happens in those first 7 years is stored subconsciously. That means it's programming you don't have to think about. You may not even know what is in there, what thoughts, what things you learned, what limits you had starting from a very young age, or what limits you have from starting from a very young age. You may not be aware of it because it's subconscious and it's an auto program. When it's subconscious, it runs on autopilot without you having to think about it. Okay, that's why those first 7 years of life are so vital in, what you experienced, but also if you are wanting to be a conscious, self-aware parent, so vital in what your kids will experience because of your mindset. So when you're working on your self-awareness, you're working on becoming your highest self, you're showing up to the world differently, right? That is impacting your children's subconscious programming, okay? So it's all a cycle and a pattern that you have the ability to change at any given point when you decide. So we've got those first 7 years of life, those subconscious autopilot programs that get going. And then after around 8 to 12, you have the piece that starts to question everything. And in the questioning process, if they, confirm what you believe to be true, then you think that is fact. That's what happens next. It's like, okay, I'm going to question everything, but either it's going to match what I experienced my first 7 years of life, and then that's going to be my truth, or it's not, and I'm going to keep seeking for the answer that makes the most sense for me. Okay, so then we kind of grow in our independence, and we either follow through with beliefs that have compiled over time, or we kind of break the mold and think differently. Okay, so this is kind of the time period where we're either agreeing with our family and finding that we have a lot of the same beliefs as them, or we don't, and we kind of clash because we don't feel like we believe the same things. Okay, and maybe our family scolds us because they're like, no, this is the way of life, and we're like, no, I don't think so. Or it's the opposite. And we're like, yeah, this is the way of life. Okay. So you get through that point of your life, those early, adolescent, then teen years, then young adult years, and you start to add on your own experiences. So you go out into the world and you start to experience things, and it either matches your belief systems or it doesn't. Okay, and you continue to kind of decide how you're going to live, how you're going to think, what you believe. And what I find in coaching a lot of times is that whatever your parents instilled in you as a kid, politically, a lot of times even with religion, cultural things, whatever they instilled in you as a kid is oftentimes what we grow to believe. We keep a lot of the same traditions. If our parents cussed like sailors, we cuss like sailors. A lot of times if your parents drank or smoked and it wasn't a traumatic experience for you, you might drink and smoke. If it was traumatic, you may do everything opposite, trying to run as far away as possible from their behaviors, right? It's very interesting to see how the human mind takes in so much information and creates a unique individual kind of life. But for the most part, we often just keep in a cycle of like, well, this is what my parents did. This is how my mom did it. This is how my grandma did it. Even down to, it's interesting, even down to the health ailments people have. Well, my grandma had high blood pressure. My mom has high blood pressure, so I'm going to have high blood pressure. It's really interesting that we will also say things like this. Well, my grandma struggled with her weight, and so my mom also struggled with her weight, or my dad also struggled with his weight, and now I struggle with my weight. It's interesting because scientific studies actually show that none of that has a correlation. A lot of people think like it's the genes in my family, this is what happens, but there's actually so much scientific data that proves that wrong, and that it's actually a fixed mindset issue. It's not actually your genetics or your genes. It's that your belief around it is so profound that we actually alter our genes in the way that our body works. We don't always realize that our mind is so powerful that you can alter the state of your health just with your mind. So like people that are constantly afraid of like, I'm going to get sick, I'm going to get sick, I'm going to get sick, I'm going to get sick. And then they end up sick and they're like, see, I knew that I was going to get sick. But the interesting thing about that is that oftentimes what caused that is the strength in their belief. It actually alters the way that your body communicates. It's like all in epigenetics. It's so very interesting. There's so many studies out there. Dr. Joe Dispenza does tons of work around this. And I don't know, I always find it interesting to see like how people are creating a reality a lot of times they don't even want, just based on having such a fixed mindset. So we kind of reviewed all of that. You go from subconscious programming to more conscious programming. But here's the thing, in adulthood, you now, as an adult, have a responsibility to choose if you're going to believe all of the programming that you have had up to this point. Because even though you've experienced your life as that being your truth, whatever things you learned, whether it's we'll never have a lot of money, we'll never be able to go on vacations, my grandma had this autoimmune disease, so my mom had it, so now I'm going to have it. Like all of those things are actually optional. And there's actually scientific studies to prove how powerful your mind is. The thing that people struggle with is they get into this fixed place where they're like, no, this is how it is. This is the truth. But it's not always the case. It's your truth, because what you've done over time is constantly built connections in your brain to prove what you believe is true. Okay, so let me offer some examples. Let's say that as a kid, my first 7 years of life, I experienced hearing, money doesn't grow on trees. Rich people are snobs. You wouldn't want to be rich. By the way, I did hear that my first 7 years of life. I constantly heard things like, we're running out of money, or we need to borrow money from like my great-grandparents at the time. And I would often say things like, I'm going to be rich one day. And my grandma or grandpa would be like, well, mostly my grandma, she would say things like, well, rich people are snobs. Why would you ever want to be rich? And so remember that gets stored in my subconscious. Now, around 8 to 12, I get to question if I believe that's true. So anytime I would be around people with money, I was taking in whether or not I felt that they were snobby or mean. And what your brain does is it looks for evidence to be right. That's what your brain ultimately wants to do. It doesn't look for evidence to be wrong, because we don't like to experience the negative emotion that comes along with being wrong. It likes to prove that you're right. So what's easier to see is every time someone with money is being a snob, okay, or is being mean or whatever, to prove that my grandma was right. Now, I had a different experience because the wealthy people that I would be around as a kid, to me, were not snobs. So that's probably why I am who I am today, because for me personally, I questioned that and I found evidence for that to not be true, which then as an adult made me realize I can have wealth and not be a snob. Just because you have money doesn't mean you're a snob, right? But the interesting thing is my grandma a lot of times still feels that way, that rich people are snobby or selfish. And it's so very interesting because there's people that she's surrounded by that are not that way at all. But she has practiced that belief so often, and her brain has looked for so much evidence that she's correct, that is what she sees, is greed and snobbery, and all of this negative stuff associated with having money. And what it does too is it reiterates her lack of desire to want more, or to try for more, or to even be able to keep large amounts of money, because she associates it with negativity versus someone who associates it with positivity. Like for me, having more means that I get to help more people. It means that I'm reaching such a broad amount of people, in my business. It means that I get to give back to community. It has no negative connotation for me, and I don't associate it with people being snobby or greedy or yucky or icky, okay? Now, certainly there are people in the world that don't do good with their money, but money really only highlights someone's personality already, okay? So if that was in them before the money, then it's heightened and you see it more with money. If that's not who they were before the money, like money doesn't actually change people, it just highlights who you are at your core when you have it and what you would do with it, okay? But that's the interesting thing. Let's just say that I believed that belief, okay? And I became an adult. Well, then my brain is always looking for, again, those reasons that I'm right. So in every corner, no matter who I would meet that was wealthy, I'm looking for a reason to believe that rich people are snobs, or that there's never going to be enough money. Now, I will tell you that is one of the beliefs I have had to work on healing, is that there's never enough, okay? And I actually have a program all about this in the Becoming Your Highest Self portal, which, by the way, I don't even know that I've announced this, but at any given point, you guys, if you want more than just the podcast, you want to be able to just engulf yourself in coaching content, you can get access to the Becoming Your Highest Self portal on my website, MaceyRenee.com, for $99 a month. I think up to this point, there's maybe like 60 something videos in there, coaching videos. So you could watch a video every week for a year and still not be done. And I'm constantly adding new content to that. It's only $99 a month for the subscription, and you can cancel anytime. I don't think that I've ever announced that, but it's on MaceyRenee.com under the one-on-one coaching tab. And it doesn't include any one-on-one coaching with me, but it does include, like, as you're paying the subscription, you can get in there. You can watch as many videos as you want. If you want to watch 10 in a day, if you want to watch 10 in a week, you can do whatever you want to do. If you want to cancel, you can cancel, but it's only $99 a month, and you actually get to see content taught at my whiteboard, and content that I was teaching in Becoming Her before that program closed. So just a little side note there. But that's the thing, you guys. Our mindset can so easily become fixed. Now, here's the tricky thing. Once you reach 35 years old, it is harder to change all of your belief systems. It's not impossible, so I don't need all of my 35 plus to turn off the podcast and, feel defeat that they're going to be stuck however they are forever, because that's not the case. It just means you have to work harder, because you have 35 plus years of believing the same things over and over and over again, and of finding evidence to believe the things you've believed over and over and over and over again. Okay. And also, traumatic events can impact this as well. So let's say you were a child, or even a teen, or even a young adult, and you watched your mother have an affair, or your father have an affair. Okay. And you then have the belief that no one is trustworthy. And then you get married, and you start to find that these little thoughts are creeping up. Like maybe your significant other has never done anything to you in that way, but you have this little thought in the back of your mind, like, I can't trust anybody. I'm going to put up this hard shell. I'm not going to fully love, because at any point they could, they could betray me, or I could experience infidelity just like my mother or father experienced, okay? And so it keeps you from being all in. And it's because of the little subconscious, tiny, itty bitty, teeny weeny belief that was formed when you witnessed it in your own life, and there's trauma around it. And so now you anticipate the same thing. It doesn't mean that it's true. Your partner may never, ever do that ever. But think about how you're showing up to the relationship if that is in the back of your mind. I've actually worked with clients on this who had a horrible first relationship or first marriage or horrible dating experience because their significant other had an affair or cheated or, was not honest about things that they were doing. And then, they divorce or they go their separate ways, and then they're in a new marriage. But in this new marriage, in the back of their mind, they're like, I don't know that I'm 100% all in, like that I let myself fully feel everything in the relationship because I'm so afraid of experiencing what I did in the past again. That's an example of like that fixed mindset, right? Like perpetuating cycles that don't even have to exist because of something in the past, and putting yourself through suffering twice because you're living every day wondering what if, which is totally full of suffering. And then if it were to happen, you've just suffered through it twice. Like, do you see what I'm saying? So we have to be very mindful of the beliefs that we're letting stay in our life. Are they actually contributing to you being your highest self, to you having the best, most loving relationship, the best communication, the best financial experiences, the things that you want to do, like travel or, buy a new home or move to a different city or state or country? Where are your current beliefs holding you back, and how far do they date back in being strongly wired? Because in order to rewire them, you have to be aware of what they are. And you have to question if they're even a belief you want to keep. So a lot of times our beliefs are creating suffering. Our beliefs a lot of times are not even creating a life we're excited about or proud of or happy with. But we choose to keep them because we've had them for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And we think that's the only way. We're like, no, this is the truth. But it's not. It's your truth, but it's not the world's truth, because if it was, everybody would be living exactly the same way. Someone who is not wealthy, right? Maybe they would label themselves as poor or not having a lot of money. They're going to have a completely different belief system than someone who experiences millions of dollars in wealth. Okay? And both of them believe what they believe and think that it's the truth. But we know from the night and day differences that whatever it is that they believe isn't truth. It's true to them. Wealthy people may believe money is abundant. It's always coming to me. It's always available to me. I always make more of it. If I have to spend it, it always comes back. That's their truth. And that truth is serving them because they have exactly what they want. For someone who is struggling financially, if they're like, there's never enough, my boss won't give me a raise, I'm never going to get an increase, I'm miserable, I don't get along with my coworkers, that feels like their truth, and it's not creating results that they want. And the people who ultimately become their highest selves and get the life that they want are the ones that are not willing to stay in fixed mindsets that are not giving them the life that they desire. So at any point, whether it's your parenting, your communication, your marriage, your relationships with friends, family, your leadership abilities, your job, your anything, your finances, whatever. I can't remember everything that I've said. Every single category of your life can change when you're willing to question your fixed mindset, the things that have been stored in your subconscious and the things that you have repeated so many times that you believe them to be true. Because if you're believing it to be true, do you actually like what it's creating? Because that's the key. If you do not like what your beliefs to be true are creating, guess what? That is where you can do some serious reevaluating. That's what coaching is for. Coaching really, it's like you handing me your brain and saying, I like this, but I don't like this. And I would like to change this, and I don't like this. but here's all the reasons that I believe this. And I don't really see how it's going to change. And then I do all of my magic work to help you see things differently so that you can choose if you want to take on new beliefs that are going to serve you much better for the life that you actually say that you want to create. Okay? So it's kind of like your brain being reconstructed, rewired, going back to that malleability, kind of like whenever you're a young child, you just, you're soaking everything in. You kind of, when you hire a coach, come with that same childlike energy and you're like, okay, I'm ready to soak in all of these new views, all of these new things, and really decide which ones I want to keep that were already mine and which ones I want to adopt so that I can create different results in my life. Okay? I hope that this episode helps you. I hope you have an amazing week. Thank you so much for your support with the podcast. We're at 50,000 downloads. I know it because by the time you all download this one, we will have hit it. So keep an eye out on my social media so that you can partake in the giveaway if you want to. Keep an eye out on your emails, your junk trash, just in case any of my emails go there. Hopefully not, but if they do, check there for some upcoming announcements. And I'm just so excited. You guys have a great week. See you next week.